Well, let's introduce who we have here, which is me, John Adams, and the original co-leader of the special edition band, Linda Bishop.
Hi, good to
Hey,
see you again. It's been a
likewise.
while.
Yes, too seldom.
It's hard
Um,
to believe that it's been 20 years since we created this project.
wow, 20 years, that was a while. So you did this with me for the first 7 years that we had the
Right.
band from
Mhm.
'05 through the end of 2012. And, that's just hundreds and hundreds of performances and things
Yes.
of every type and little changings of the guard. But anyway, we might do another one of these chats with a current member who helps front it. But for right now, since we had the time carved out, I thought it'd be fun to just chat about the kind of actual origins of it, what brought this about to even have this party band. So I'll start with my recollection first, which is that I had always done, I had always played commercial type music, dance type music, but never really as a leader. And I was never actually in a party band per se, although I did kind of help with a few gigs when you launched a project like that at one point. But I was always more of a session guy, jazz, shows, pops, concerts, things like that. And and then as I started to take on leader gigs, it came out of that world. So I would do small parties, jazz trios, quartets, and all that. So that's my background in that world of playing for parties. And then what happened is every once in a while, a lead would come across my path that I could tell that they didn't just want elegant, background music or dinner
Right.
music. They wanted it to go whoo whoo, And a couple of times I tried putting something kind of makeshift together. I remember covering a New Year's Eve gig or two, and it was just so stressful. Like, wait, what song are you singing? And it wasn't a working machine, and it just like, I'm not doing that. That's too crazy. And so I would pass along the lead, so to someone that actually did that kind of stuff. And then and I was certainly aware of you doing all this work, and I'd already met you probably another 10 years or so before that.
Right.
So anyway, great admirer of your talent, of course. And by the way, folks, when she opens her mouth and sings,
Uh,
your
Stop.
face will melt. Oh my
Thank you,
goodness.
John.
I'm serious. Just one of those voices. And I still say that about singers. I'm sitting there just playing notes behind them, trying to support it. And I just hear some singers open their mouth and they just have this beautiful thing that's pleasant to listen to no matter what they're doing with it. It's really something.
Oh, thank you.
And you were one of those singers. So anyway, so I wouldn't have really dreamed exactly of how to transition to this, but we have a beautiful mutual friend who's a complete goofball and
Yes.
one of the best sound people you'll ever meet, Danny
Yes,
Jacobs.
he's so great.
Yeah, in fact, I think he's so goofy that sometimes people don't realize how good he is at what he does
Right.
because he just makes
Yep.
it all so nonchalant. Like,
Mhm.
he's just full of quips and stuff. And so, like, for example, well, he would always set up early, and then if I crossed with him, loading in or something, he'd say, "When do we got to be back?" And then I would tell him when we needed to sound check, and he'd always say the wrong time back to me.
Yeah, that sounds
Say
like him.
5:15 and go, "Okay, I'll see you at 6:30." There's just stuff like that. Anyway, so he told me that you were doing this band and that you weren't maybe completely satisfied with how that was going, and he said you really should talk to Linda about combining forces. And the additional backdrop to that is that in 2004, my first wife, Jean, had passed away from cancer. I was left with two marvelous but young children, and I was like, it modified everything. I wasn't going to
Right.
travel very much.
Mhm.
I had to make sure that if I'm going to leave the door to go play a gig and it created, childcare issues and all that, maybe I should just be the leader when I bother to go. And and so because of those experiences with makeshift and not wanting to do the party band thing by myself, he said, you should talk to Linda, and so anyway, so what do you recall about that
Well, I
connection?
remember Danny talking to me, saying that I should talk to you, and he had told me a lot about your situation
Mhm.
and what you had gone through, and that you were more into the jazz world and everything, and that he thought that you would be great to for us to come together and put together this band that not only incorporates this really beautiful jazz music and use some wonderful jazz players, but also transition over transition the evening over to, dance and rock and things like that. And so I had done the other bands, the party bands, but our jazz set generally wasn't as great as what you and I created
Yeah.
because you knew the players. And it was very interesting because I was not a jazz singer. I was more rock and pop singer. And then I remember meeting with you, and you're like, but we need to have enough music to do really good jazz sets, and you really helped me. And
Mm.
you told me to go listen to like Ella Fitzgerald and
Mm.
all these different people, Sarah Vaughan. You gave me a list, and you gave me a list of standard songs.
Wow, I didn't
And
know
I
I did
remember, I do
that.
remember this part.
Wow.
And I started listening to that and picking songs that I felt that I could sing. And then I remember I came back to you and we started rehearsing, and you're like, wow, you sound like a real jazz singer. And I was like, really?
Yeah,
So it was
how
really
about
cool.
that?
And y'all were making fun of me because y'all said I sang jazz with a Southern twang. Remember that?
I kind of do now, yeah. Your
So,
favorite thing to get on the way home from a gig, and one guy that rode with you sometimes said, she's talking about going to get a taquito.
a taquito.
We got tickled by that. Anyway, it's charming, but we had lunch together in the
Hmm.
late in the year of 2004, and
Hmm.
that's when all this was mulling over for me, and then just to kind of make the transition realistic, we decided we would launch that in 2005. And then what we did that was a little unusual was we actually made the demos first. I don't know if you remember that, but in early 2005, we started recording the demos first, and Danny recorded us doing it.
Right.
Now, at the time, very little was video, like it's hard for us to
Exactly.
get our heads around that, but there was
I
no
know.
YouTube.
Right.
People didn't do videos unless they were trying
Right.
to be like the next Madonna or something. It was
Right.
just
Right.
kind of left to that world. Hardly anybody did. I'm sure that very forward-thinking people were already
Right.
doing them, but we weren't thinking like that. We were just going to make audio demos because that's what everybody did. And you'd hand somebody a CD, and this is our band or whatever. Websites weren't even that big of a thing. We had, thinking about, I had websites already, but wasn't, internet was slow, you wouldn't want to
Right.
like just sit there and wait for a tune to download, so we started making the audio demos, and it was a wonderful swath of music. I still have all those recordings.
Oh, that's cool. I'd like to hear
Yeah.
some of those,
I
by the
well, a
way.
couple of the a
Send me
couple
some.
of the dinner set ones are still on our website down at
Oh,
the
that's
bottom of
cool.
the because they're so suitable to like there's a version of Get Here
Oh,
and
yeah.
there's a couple of other standard type things and light
Okay.
rock tunes that are perfectly appropriate. Anyway, so we recorded all that, including
Okay.
some party music. And then the very first, I think we made one attempt to do a gig, and it was still like, no, this is not the makeshift thing we're going to do. We actually played at the Fort Worth Main Street Festival, and but it still wasn't like formed as a band yet. And I think we just did it because like, well, yeah, here's a little money, yeah, here's a
Right.
band.
Yeah.
But the first actual gigs were literally the first weekend of June of 2005.
Wow.
And it was a combination of those two worlds. You plugged us into a club venue, very high energy club venue that he had contacts with. We played there, knocked the house down, and then
Yep.
the very next night was a wedding that
Hmm.
came out of one of our sets of contacts, and it was at a
Right.
country club.
Hmm.
And by then we had a kind of a core of who the band was going to be, and off and running. We were working, several nights a month right away. And it came from both of our sets of contacts.
Right.
You
Absolutely.
had people that you knew already from your other party bands. You had
Hmm.
some agency contacts. I had other agents that knew me as a jazz guy, and all I had to do was say, I have this other thing now,
Right.
and that was fairly well received. I had some country club contacts and stuff like that, and then just a little swath of clubs just for visibility.